I'm introducing Angie Lunda, and I think a lot of you know who she is in the room, and she's also a dear friend of mine. And it's been a privilege working with her all these years, and I'm thrilled that she's here this morning with us. Very busy lady. She's been smoking fish and busy with her work out at the university. So I'm thrilled to have her here. She's going to talk to you about the project that she worked on for us here at Sealaska Heritage. And after she presents, we're going to have James jump in and give you the perspective from him as a math teacher teaching the unit.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Jackie. Well, hi everybody. I know many of you. And for those that don't know me, I've been a teacher here in the Juneau School District for a long time and was principal at Gastineau and superintendent out in Hoona. And now I'm teaching at the university in the secondary ed program and doing a little work for Sealaska. Just because Jackie's my dear friend, and when she asked me to do this, it really resonated with me. She wanted me to do a unit on halibut fishing. And since I am, among many other things, also a halibut fisherman, I thought, okay, I can do this one. And so I was really excited. And then I knew Josh would be part of the teaching of the unit, and it just kind of all came together. And I thought, okay, this is going to be really fun. And it's for middle school, which was my area of expertise. So I sat down with Jackie and kind of got some ideas about what she was thinking, and I came up with this unit. But Jackie asked me today to really not so much share the unit as talk about the process of how do you develop a culturally responsive unit. So before I start that, why don't you tell me, I've got a question for you. So you guys are like the rock stars of the Juneau School District, right? You're here on a beautiful August day, and you're participating in this wonderful professional development. And what are you hoping to get out of this? What is your goal? Ray.
Well, I think for me, most of my success comes from connection with students. Mm-hmm. And so finding new ways to connect, engaging them, and moving them forward. Meeting them where they are and moving them forward.
So ways to make connections, meeting kids where they're at, and strategies for doing that. Great. Anybody else?
Just simply coming away with a great unit that I can be proud of and is useful in my classroom.
Great. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What are the expectations from Sealaska in terms of a unit?
You mean what do we need?
Yeah, what do you need to do? I'm not putting you on the spot. This is for anybody.
We're taking a lesson that we usually do throughout the year and kind of adapting it so that it has some closer cultural connection for our students.
Okay. So you will all be writing a unit. Great.
Or a lesson.
Or a lesson. Okay. All right. So I won't scare you then. This is a very short unit. It's just about 8 days. So I think this one is actually really doable. So the unit that I developed is on fishing technologies, really. And I use the Understanding by Design, backward design, to create it. So I'll just go through it, and you can ask questions whenever you like. And I'm happy to share any of this with you, the template or anything, if you're interested. I teach curriculum development at the university, and we use backward design, and this is the template that I use in my work. And it really rings true for me. Using backward design really rings true. So backward design really is starting with what are the standards, what are the goals of your teaching, and then thinking about, okay, if these are my goals, what are the assessments? And then if these are the assessments, what are the activities that will get me to those goals? I know you all know this, but I thought I'd just say it. It helps me be clear about that as well. So that's what is meant by backward design. So this is the template that we use. Just the title, the subject, and then the unit synopsis, I think, is really important. I'll just go ahead and read it. In this unit on Tlingit and Haida fishing technologies. Students study archival halibut hooks to identify the features that made the hooks technologically successful. Students measure the head length and jaw hinge length of freshly caught halibut and use those measures to derive the standard length and weight of the fish that head came from. Students then make and test the tensile strength of halibut line, traditional halibut line made from cedar bark, red cedar bark. And then as a culminating project, students will make a halibut hook, a traditional halibut hook that's designed to catch the largest possible halibut based upon the tensile strength of the rope that they made. So really, that's the big idea, that's the synopsis of the whole unit. And then these are the standards. So Jackie asked, and she's going to ask you also, to make sure that you incorporate the core cultural values that Sealaska Heritage Institute uses. So these were the ones that I selected that really seemed to fit with the unit that I developed. Ha'ani, honoring and utilizing our land. So utilizing the resources of our land really is what this unit is about. So that one seemed to be the most important. And then I went through and thought about, okay, this is a middle school unit. What are the math standards that will be addressed? And I just went through the standards and picked the ones that seem to really focus on the mathematics that are embedded in the unit. Adding and subtracting with rational numbers, solving real life problems, constructing and interpreting scatter plots. All of those are things that are going to be embedded in the unit, as well as graphing. So graphing relationships between the length and weight of halibut, between the jaw length or the jaw width and the weight of the halibut. That's the critical piece that they're going to do. And then constructing a line of best fit. So that's the mathematics that's in the unit. And then the cultural standards I went through, and I see you have this great new book on the cultural standards. And I selected the standards that I thought most closely aligned with the work that I did. It's parts of all A, B, C, and D, and I just selected the ones that were closest. I'm not going to read them all to you. You can read, and you'll also have a copy of the unit if you want it. But that's the thinking that I did as I created the unit. And then I thought about, okay, what are the big ideas that I want students to get out of this? And I wanted students, this is really the frame that I use whenever I write a culturally responsive unit, and it really is based on the brilliance of our ancestors. I want students to come away with an appreciation for the brilliance of our ancestors. And I think that's kind of a broad statement, but I think every unit that I've ever written, that's really what I was trying to get at. So in particular for this unit, I want students to walk away with this understanding that our ancestors here in Southeast Alaska possessed extraordinary technological skills developed over thousands of years, which allowed them to live and thrive in our environment. And I want them to understand that our ancestors developed various technologies, including highly advanced fishing technologies. Peripheral to this halibut unit, they might think about salmon fishing or hooligan fishing, all kinds of different fisheries besides halibut. I think there's just a natural connection, and students will naturally be interested once they've explored halibut fishing. They'd be able to think about the brilliance, the creativity, the engineering ability of our ancestors that were able to figure out ways to catch fish and thrive here in Southeast Alaska. And then the big ideas for math is that we can use measurements from one part of an object to indirectly measure another part of the same object if we know the relationships between the two. That's kind of a big idea in the math, and I want them to come away with that. And then I want them to know that we can use mathematics to model real life relationships. So those are the big understandings. And then I always think about, okay, what are the misunderstandings that kids might have? And one misunderstanding that I think was more common maybe when I was in school, but I think still there are remnants of it still, and that is that a misconception students often have is that our ancestors were primitive and that they needed to learn Western ways in order to succeed here. That is a huge misconception that maybe students don't outright say it, but there are little vestiges of that still in some people's thinking. So I want to dispel that misconception as part of this unit. So those are the things that I just thought about as I was thinking about creating the unit. And then content specifically, the essential question that drives the unit is what fishing technologies did our Tlingit and Haida ancestors use to catch halibut? And under that, how did they construct these brilliant hooks and lines capable of catching? You know, halibut get big. They get really big. You know, the record is over 400 pounds. And so there's a lot of engineering involved in developing the technology to capture them. So I want kids to really appreciate that. And then what can we learn by examining the actual hooks? And James has one back there, and Jackie has one that's actually fished and caught halibut before. Jackie, are they able to look at that one? Sure. Okay, so later on, maybe during a break, you'll get to look at those. But there's a real brilliance in the engineering and in the simplicity of the technologies that I want kids to walk away with. Okay, so in the template then, those are the kind of the objectives of the unit. And now specifically, what knowledge and skills, what do kids need to know, and what will they be able to do as a result? So these are the very specific things that they should walk away with. They should there are more key terms. I just started listing, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to just stop there. But there are some basic key terms that kids will need to know. They need to know what a variable is. They need to kind of know, maybe not the term regression analysis, but line of best fit. They need to know that when you graph two variables and you can see that the variables are correlated, that there's a mathematical way to draw in a line of best fit. And that's the whole mathematics of regression analysis. So this is like a little taste, a little dip your toe into the water of that very advanced mathematics. They'll need to know about tensile strength of line. That's one of the things they're going to be testing. They need to know about otoliths for aging halibut. They need to know all the measurements that scientists make about halibut, including, you know, the standard length, the jaw hinge width, the length of the head. How is that defined by scientists as they do the measurements? And then they'll be able to describe the life history of halibut. I mean, that's part of it, and the importance of halibut. So both the life history and the fisheries. They'll be able to state the weight of a halibut given its length, just like we all do if we go fishing, and we can look in the back of a tide book and use those tables. And they'll be able to state the standard length of a halibut if they only have the head, and they can measure the head length. There's a mathematical relationship that allows us to figure out, okay, if this is how big the head is, how big was the whole fish, and from that, if that's how long the whole fish was, how much did it weigh? So those are kind of deriving those important measurements just based on the head. And we did this, why? Because we aren't able to get a whole bunch of halibut for kids to mess around with, but we knew we could get the heads from the cold storage. So we just were able to, Jackie engineered this, I'm not sure exactly how she did it, but she got a bunch of halibut heads so that kids could actually get in and do those measurements. And as a science teacher, I knew that's what would kind of get them interested. Maybe they weren't all interested in getting all slimy, but I know that many of them would be kind of intrigued by that, especially if they hadn't, maybe hadn't handled halibut before. Okay, so those are some of the things they need to know and some of the things they'll need to be able to do. They'll need to be able to measure the head length and measure the thickness using a caliper, measure the thickness of the jaw hinge. They'd need to be able to make tables from those data that they collected. They'd need to be able to derive an equation. Maybe they didn't quite get there. Turns out that the group of students, and James can talk about this, the group of students that actually field tested were mostly 6th graders, so they didn't necessarily have all the sophisticated mathematics background that we might have expected. They can use their scientific calculators, though, to calculate lines of best fit given the data. They could predict the size of halibut a traditional hook can catch based on specific measurements. So they could, really what I wanted them to do was design this hook so that it could catch a halibut that wouldn't break their line, right? That's kind of the big idea. And they'd need to be able to actually use traditional materials to make the hook and use cedar bark to make the rope. Okay, so that's kind of stage 1. What is it? What are the standards? What are the core traditional values? What are the cultural standards? What are the mathematical standards? And then what are the objectives? What are kids going to know and be able to do after they do this unit? Any questions so far? Okay. So then I had to think about assessment, and this was a summer camp situation, right? So it wasn't like sitting down at desks in a classroom, and so I kind of kept that in mind as I developed this unit as well. And instead of having, a traditional paper and pencil test, I thought, okay, the big evaluation, the big assessment for this project will actually be the hook. It's going to be the hook that they create. But I wanted them to document their work as well. So keep a journal of their thinking as they went along, as they learned about the fish, as they learned about the relationships between the head length and the overall length. So there would be an evaluation of the journal. And then what are they going to do with it? They're going to share their work with their families. And there was a kind of a show and tell event at the very end of the unit of the camp, and they were all able to show their hooks and their lines, some completely finished, some in various stages, but gosh, the kids were really proud of the work that they had done. So that's the assessment, the actual hook and the journal documenting their work. And other evidence, these are just some things that I thought they could keep in their journal, kind of a ladder of learning as they developed, the diagrams and plans as they, sketches as they were figuring out how to make their hook. Photographs, I don't know if they were able to do this, but I think really great documentation are photographs, so photos of the works in progress, and lab reports, so as they're collecting data on, how much weight could their line hold before it broke, those kinds of things could be kept and then shared. So my line broke at 25 pounds, Josh's broke at 15 pounds. We have a whole class set of data that students would collect. Those were just made up numbers, by the way. I'm sure Josh's rope was much stronger than that. And then the measurements from the halibut. So they would collect their own data and then share the data from the other students. So that's creating a little bit of interdependence. If they were only able to use the data that they themselves collected, there wouldn't be big enough data set. So they needed to make sure that everybody in the room, and there were, I think, more than 40 students, Jackie?
40.
More than 40 students. So by being able to use all that data, it makes it more reliable. Okay, and then I thought a really great thing would be for students to make videos. I don't think they actually did this, but I think that would be a great way, a culminating project, a video kind of documenting their progress and then showing their work and explaining how they constructed that hook. It was a short camp though, and I don't think they were able to get to that stage, but in future years, I think that would be an awesome way to finish it out. Okay, so then the next step, and this is where it really is backward design, because I know when I first started teaching, this is where we started. Okay, what are the cool activities I want to do? with my students. But really, it's a much stronger unit if you start at the end. What are the standards? How am I going to figure out if they really know it? And now I'm going to come up with some activities that line up. Okay, so the first thing we want to do here is think about how are we going to hook them into this unit. And there's some great video footage available. If you Google halibut biting a hook, you'll get all kinds of wonderful footage. And I think that might be a really great way to hook kids in, no pun intended, into this unit by just watching these really incredible fish striking bait and thrashing around on the hook. It really is pretty fascinating. So I thought, that might be a way to kind of spark the unit. Looking at pictures of some really big halibut. These are historical photos of some really big halibut that have been landed, 400 plus halibut. We don't catch them as much anymore. We haven't caught a halibut over 200 pounds in several years, actually, but there used to be more halibut, quite large. So thinking about, okay, these are the fish. This is what the fish look like. And then, just kind of browsing around and looking at some pictures. This is a traditional line in the bottom here, and then a traditional halibut hook. All of these photos are available on, I just Googled and found the pictures. This, though, is a book that's out of print, and Jackie has actually several copies of this book. It's Indian Fishing by Hilary Stewart. It is absolutely a fabulous book, and I've always thought you could do a whole curriculum around just that book. It's just so rich. Yes?
They had a copy of that yesterday when we went down into the archives, and so that's something that you can check out. We've tried to find it on Amazon, and it isn't very easy, but it's definitely something you can find here in their archives.
Thank you. Yeah, it's available on Amazon, but it's like $65 now because it's out of print. I know we had one, we kept it on our boat because our kids loved looking at it, and I don't know what happened to it. I went to find it and I couldn't find it, but it's really full of wonderful ideas for culturally responsive units, and I encourage you to check it out and just look at it. You'll be able to make connections immediately. No matter what your content area is, you'll be able to make connections. So these are just some pictures showing some different rigs for fishing halibut from various tribal peoples along the coast from Washington, British Columbia, and up into Alaska. I don't know. The hooks in this picture are all of the steamed and bent design, not the constructed of wood design, but there are other pages available from this book. I just threw one in to show. Originally, when I wrote this unit, I didn't include any visuals, and being a visual person, I thought, okay, I put the link so you could click, but I found that people maybe didn't have time, so I encourage you to make it as visual as you can, just to make it enticing for people to want to read it, because hopefully the units that you all develop will be available to share with other people who teach in your content area. So we'll be growing this volumes of culturally responsive units for other people to use. So just a little design tip there. I think, obviously having an elder come in at this point during the anticipatory set would be awesome. Having an elder come in to talk about halibut fishing would be great. Or if there's somebody who could come in and tell a story related to halibut, that would be awesome. I don't know. I wasn't able to locate anybody here in Juneau, but I'm sure with the resources of Sealaska, they would be able to help with that. The Sheldon Museum from Sitka has some great resources, and I put a link here, but I actually copied it into this plan so that you could see it. So this is a historical photo of a pretty big halibut. But then this line I thought was really important. To ensure a manageable size catch, Tlingit fishermen devised a special halibut hook which would only take a 30 to 50 pound fish. A large fish obviously could sink a canoe or could injure the fisherman. or it would break the line, being that they were using line made from either bull kelp stipes or from cedar bark cordage. It's not as strong as the halibut line that we all use today. And of course, my opinion is medium-sized fish are really better for eating. The really big ones, the mussels, are really large and difficult for, if you're going to dry it especially, it makes it more difficult. So just kind of letting kids look around at some of these pictures. If you have copies of the book, and having them flip through, having actual halibut hooks for them to explore at this point would be really cool. And then lead the students in a KWL discussion. I think that would be a really great way to kind of set it before you start it. Okay, so now we're set, and then I just broke it down into, I think there are 8 lessons here. And what I did is just kind of describe the lessons really briefly, and then more detailed in the actual lesson plans. This is kind of a unit overview. So before they start, they need to know a little bit about the biology of the fish. And so what I did, being a great teacher, is went on the internet and found some other great teachers who have done work already and used their work. So the International Pacific Halibut Commission actually has a series of wonderful lessons designed to introduce students to Pacific halibut. So instead of creating my own, I just put a link in there to their great lessons. So that would be the place to start. Use the IPHC lesson plans. There are 4 lesson plans in this series. They've got underwater footage of halibut swimming around in their natural environment, show some predators, some prey items of the halibut. So really gives students a feel for what are halibut, how do they fit in our ecosystem. There's something about the life history and the range, where do they live. The beautiful thing about halibut is, unlike salmon, which only come once a year, halibut are here for the majority of the year in water where people can catch them. So they were and continue to be a very important food source for people here in Southeast Alaska. So students get to see that. They'll learn a little bit about the life history by going through those lessons. There's also a bunch of resources available developed by our Department of Fish and Game. There's the Alaska Wildlife Notebook series, if you're not familiar with that. It's a great resource. It's got kind of a one-pager on all kinds of fish and mammals and shellfish and birds from Alaska. So I just suggested kind of introducing students to halibut, their life history, size, and all of that. And then what are they going to do? They can't just read about it, right? They can't just watch the video. So I thought have them work in groups and kind of divvy up the work and assign each student in a group of 4 to teach the rest of their group about something specific about halibut. So thinking about the spawning, life history, the lifespan, that could be one person's work. The other one could talk about the size range. Another person could talk about the habitat of the Pacific halibut at different life stages. And then the food habits. What do they eat and what eats them? And they could make a poster to then share with their classmates after they've kind of looked at all these resources, watched the videos, and gone through the PowerPoint with their teacher. They could do that. Okay, so that's lesson 1. And then in the second lesson, starting them thinking about the halibut fisheries, both modern, so they need to know how do we catch halibut in modern times, and then also how did we traditionally catch halibut. And so that's kind of an introductory lesson to the halibut fisheries. And then I thought it really would be good for them to kind of be introduced to this idea of indirect measurement in a way that is accessible for everybody. At first I thought of height and weight, and then I thought, no, that might be uncomfortable for some students to have to record their height and weight. So I thought, okay, how about height and shoe size? Those are less intimidating pieces, and I thought, okay, they could collect that data. So they're going to measure their height, measure all of their classmates' heights, and their shoe size and record that as class data, and then graph it, make a table and make a graph and see if they can see the relationship between the height of a person and the size of their feet. And that kind of introduces them to that idea of line of best fit. Not perfect, but I think for middle school, it is important to make it concrete for the students. So I'm curious to know if they did this part and if it worked out. And then to think about the graph that is derived. Is it a linear graph? Does a line really look like it would fit in there? Is it more of a curve? Is it positively correlated or negatively correlated? Those are all mathematical ideas that we could really discuss in this section. And I suggested using this NCTM website for graphing a line of best fit. But I talked to Lexi, who was the math teacher, Lexi Razor, and she said, and James, you were there too, that it really wasn't the best, and Lexi actually found something better. So I'm curious to know what that was, and we'll switch it out here. But that's the one that I had found seemed reasonable, but that's why it says draft across, because it's still definitely a work in progress. Okay, the next lesson was just looking at closely examining traditional halibut hooks. And Sealaska, as you know, downstairs, they're working on an exhibit about halibut hooks. They have tons of data. They've got measurements, historical measurements that somebody went through museum collections and measured halibut hooks. There's all kinds of stuff available, as well as looking at the real halibut hooks that have been made. And there are also, I found a couple of really great videos. One is of a Haida fisherman and carver who's talking about a hook that he made and talking about how it works and why it's designed the way it is. So that's a really short video. I got a link there. And then a Tlingit fisherman doing the same, talking about it. So I thought students could just start to get a feel for what the fisheries are like, and then more specifically, how do the traditional hooks work? And the next lesson is the messy one, and that's where they actually get the tote of at least 50 halibut heads and start measuring. And so I don't think I really need to say a lot about this, but basically I wanted them to measure the head length. You can see it's from the tip of the chin to the end of its gill cover, and very, very carefully, so that's another skill in there, very, very carefully measure the head length, and then using calipers measure the jaw, the thickness of the jaw hinge, because after they've done some exploring with those halibut hooks, they'll be able to see that this is the spot where the traditional halibut hook almost always catches a fish. It goes underneath that big bone and circles around that big bone, and the fish are completely hooked. So if any of you have caught halibut before on a regular circle hook, they don't always hook this way. Sometimes they're hooked in a piece of skin or right near the teeth, and they're prone to break. But the traditional halibut hooks, once they were hooked, they usually were right here on this, at that point. And they circle around the bone, as you can see. This picture is from the International Pacific Halibut Commission. So that's a really important measurement, right? We want the hook to catch exactly no more than a 50-pound fish, probably smaller, because I don't think any of the lines had a tensile strength of 50. Did they?
We had some that got up to 50, 48, 49.
Very cool. Okay. So, but so we really are trying to figure out, how to make our hook so that it doesn't take too big a fish. So they're going to collect all this data, the head length, the thickness of the jaw, and then they're going to derive from the head length, they're going to derive the overall length, and then using a table, they're going to derive the weight of the halibut. Does all that make sense to people? Okay. I wasn't sure if I had clearly stated it. So they're going to collect all that data, and then they're going to share, and hopefully you had a full tote of heads and were able to get at least 50 measurements, and that everybody was able to successfully and accurately make their measurements. I understand there was a problem with the calipers. We got kind of too fancy a calipers. They're digital, and they got slimy and they quit working. So I think James saved the day and had one set that was working. Is that right? So they were able to collect some data. But so maybe a more mechanical caliper would be appropriate. For me, I thought it was really important to be accurate, but I guess you have to balance that. And talking to the carver who came along to teach the students how to make the hooks, traditionally, obviously, we didn't use calipers. We used, body measurements. So he said, okay, when you make your halibut hook, make sure you can slide your thumb in between the barb and the other piece. Those are important, equally important measurements that we could use. Okay, so that's it. They collect that data, and now they're going to make their line. They had some great weavers out there that showed students how to twine the cedar bark and to make line. There's also another great Hillary Stewart book called Cedar that I think is still in print. You can actually buy it, but it has everything that's traditionally made out of cedar and cedar bark. So I thought having a couple copies of that. I found some videos showing students how they can make cordage, but they had, at this summer camp, they had live humans, wonderful weavers there showing them how to do the cording, the twining. So they had to make at least a 18-inch, 24-inch piece of line so that they could test it in the machine. And so what I had envisioned was actually making a little instrument like this. I found a YouTube video of this guy. He's like a Dr. Science guy who showed how to make a tensile strength tester just using a regular fishing a scale for fishing that had one special property, is that it would leave a little piece of plastic wherever it broke, wherever the line broke. So Jackie bought one of these scales, and I think they didn't end up building this, but they just pulled on it. They hooked the line on, and students pulled on the line until their line broke, and the little piece of plastic would mark where the line broke, and they would collect that data. So they could then figure out what's the average, the mean for all of the pieces of cordage, but they could then use that information in designing their halibut hook. Okay, and then they just make their hook. This took quite a long time, I think, but they had a wonderful carver, Donald Gregory, come in to teach the students how to make a halibut hook. There is also another Sealaska Heritage Institute unit on making halibut hooks that was done by Henry Hopkins, a Juneau science teacher. So there are resources available. Luckily, we had Donald who came in and showed the students how to make it, and he pre-made little kits so that the students could make the hook, and James will talk more about that when he has the floor. And that's it. That's the whole unit. Except I think in any great unit there should be some kind of time for reflection, and I think that's where I thought making those videos would be a powerful end to it, where kids really thought about the whole process, everything that they had done, both making the line, carving the hook, measuring the fish, and then they could kind of reflect on that and make a little 3 to 5 minute video about it. That would kind of seal the deal in terms of what did I really learn here. They did have some closure to the unit in that they had parents come in, and it was a very well attended event. Lots of parents came, and students showed all of their work, including their halibut hook and line, and as well as a bent wood box that they had made. So there should be some kind of closure where kids kind of reflect on what they'd done. So that's the unit. And then what I've been doing is working on put my glasses on here, on just creating the lessons. Let's see if I can make this big enough where you might be able to see it. So I found a pretty simple template for making the lessons, and I thought I would make one for each of the 8. I haven't finished yet, but I'll show you the one that I have pretty much done here. Basically, the first lesson is to introduce students to halibut. So students will be able to describe the life history and importance of halibut. That's the objective. And then the activities we've already gone over, just using that IPHC curriculum. I've got the IPHC curriculum available here, so you can just download the whole thing. And then you can print off copies of the Wildlife Notebook on halibut. There are other resources. There's a Sea Grant publication called Flat Out Facts About Halibut. That's great. There's a little species profile available on the Department of Fish and Game on halibut. It's got all kinds of things that you can click on. It has all kinds of photographs of halibut. So if students had iPads or computers, they could do some research just using these very great resources that are available easily on halibut. And then, like I said before, you're going to have the students break into groups and make a poster that they're going to teach the rest of their group about their part of the either the life history or the importance of halibut. And then I thought this is something I want my university students to do, is really think about, okay, we spend a lot of time in the summer talking about what are the culturally relevant teaching best practices. And so I want students to name those, to actually say, these are the culturally relevant practices that are embedded in this unit. And in this case, the best practices are, you're not just having kids sit there and pour information into their head, right? You're having them read, you're having them work in groups, you're having them be the teacher, so they're taking on that role of the teacher, so you're creating that interdependence in that small group. And it's definitely connected to place. It is a place-based unit. Halibut, just about every student in your class probably has some familiarity with halibut. Either they've seen a live halibut, they've eaten halibut, they know somebody who's caught a halibut, they've seen a picture of their aunt or uncle with a big halibut. You know, there's some familiarity because it's place. It is the place-based. So those are some of the best practices. I didn't yet come up with any extensions, but I think that would be an important thing to do for students who finish quickly or they've got it. What can we do to extend it? And then I found a rubric on Read, Write, Think that I thought was perfect for the poster presentation. So how are you going to evaluate it? You'll use the rubric to evaluate the posters, the materials, the resources, etc. So for me, I think I really feel like these are good templates. The UBD template is simple. I've taken out some of the extra parts that I don't think are needed. I've kind of narrowed it down to what I think are the critical pieces. And then I really like the simplicity of this lesson plan. And I'd be happy to share the templates with you as you write yours. This is what I ask of my students in my curriculum development class as well, that they write the unit overview and write a lesson plan for each day of their unit. And they have to do a 10 to 15 day unit for the curriculum development class. So that's it. And I think really, for me, it's going back to that big idea that I started with at the very beginning, is really trying to highlight the brilliance of our ancestors. That is just that's the piece that I think really is important. I don't know about you, but when I went to school here in Juneau, when I was a student in school, being Tlingit was not a good thing. It was not a cool thing. So I think that's important. That's an important message. That's it.